Hello everyone, this is a quick video on the TP-Link AC1200 or 1200 Wi-Fi router, dual band, gigabit, Archer C64 router. This was in a Prime Day deal in the UK and was fairly sensibly priced. Back of the box, nothing stands out other than it does have a polar diagram of Wi-Fi coverage, which is fairly unusual for a consumer router. You have a gigabit WAN port, we may as well look at the device in just a moment, 4 gigabit LAN ports, and then Wi-Fi. So, this is the device. In the box, it comes with a network cable and its power adapter. It also comes with probably a not very useful quick start manual. I will just show this briefly on the video. If you're interested in what it says, you will just have to pause the video and read the bit that you want to see from this manual. There we go. So, router comes like this. It has annoying plasticky protectors on the aerials, which are beyond difficult to remove. I was hoping that they would just slide off, but they're not. They're like glued on, or double-sided, well not double-sided, but taped on, or you literally can't, start to remove them. And even if you do, like I've done there, unwrap it, it then gets stuck on itself. That one wasn't too bad, but a couple of these that I've already set up were a real pain to get these aerials off of. Now that's done, we've got power supply, which is 1 amp, 12 watts and 12 volts, with a connector which looks like that. So, underside of the router, has the MAC address, a default wireless pin, and its wireless name. Also shows 12 volts 1 amp there as well. Back of the router, you got a WPS/reset button over on the right hand side, power socket, Ethernet WAN socket, and then 4 gigabit network sockets as well. So let's plug this in. Oh sorry, on the front as well you have a power light, a wireless light and another wireless light, so one's probably 2.4 gigahertz, one is 5 gigahertz, a computer symbol which will be the network sockets or Ethernet activity, and a little world symbol which will be the internet, whether the internet's connected. So let's plug the device in. And it must have booted up. So we've got power light on, 2 wireless lights are on, and I've got nothing plugged in, and it's not plugged into the internet either. So if I get a network cable and plug it into the blue internet port, internet light's gone orange, and it should probably, very soon after, go green. I've just got standard DHCP network here. If you had PPP or another way of connecting to your broadband, you'd need to log into the web interface and configure it on here. So the next thing you will see will be a video of the screen and the admin interface of this router. There'll also be another video in the description, or linked to in the description, which will be the factory reset process for this router. Okay, so we now move on to the web interface of this TP-Link Archer C64 router. Its default IP address is 192.168.0.1. So the first page you get when you unbox this or unpack this is a requirement to set a password. It doesn't have a default password. So if you've been given this router, or if you need to make changes on this router, there won't be something obvious like admin or password or TP-Link or whatever as the password. Somebody will have invented a password at the time that they set the router up. In this case, there's also a lot of restrictions, so you can't just use the word password because it doesn't match needing lots of different characters. You can use password exclamation mark. You can use admin exclamation mark, admin full stop, but you can't just use the word admin or the word password. So I'm going to set a password and then click on Let's Get Started. It asks me what time zone I'm in, and that's correct for where I am. And you can either do auto detect, but actually it's probably going to be much better if you can get the correct details from your internet provider and manually configure what kind of connection you need. So a lot of providers, especially in the UK, will be PPPoE, and then you go on to next, and that's where you'll fill in a username and password, and that's how it will connect. Followed by a lot of other providers, say for example HyperOptic will be dynamic IP, and then very few will be static IP, and even fewer will be L2TP or PPTP. So in my case it's dynamic IP, and I'm going to go next. You can do MAC address cloning. I've not seen that required for quite some time unless it's a really niche or small internet provider where you need to provide a MAC address which matches what's on their records. Also supports a couple of other random things, and custom allows you to set a VLAN as well. So for example, if you're on a fiber provider that gave you an ONT and you needed to send traffic tagged with a certain VLAN, you can use the ISP profile to do that. Can personalize the Wi-Fi. The default Wi-Fi password is just the numeric one on the label on the underside. In this case, I'm going to call it Archer Test. By default, it seems to call the 5G a separate name. I'd rather they were combined, so I'm just going to call them exactly the same as just Archer Test. And I'm going to give that password as Wi-Fi password. And it will apply, potentially reboot, but I'd hope it wouldn't. No, it's worked straight away. TP-Link Cloud Services, I'd rather not, but it does, I guess, if you really like things like that, like administering your router through an app, especially maybe if you're away from home, you can sign up to this TP-Link Cloud service. But generally I don't trust these kind of things. I'd rather that the router was standalone, mine and mine alone to configure. So I'm going to click onto skip. Okay, so this is what the home screen of the router looks like. It doesn't appear to fit on one screen, and I don't have the option to scroll the mouse wheel either to scroll down. So there's some stuff that's down here that falls off the bottom of the page. I'm going to have to zoom out to get that to fit in. It was only one line of the MAC address that was there. So their little banner along the bottom here hides stuff at the bottom. Oh, now I can scroll. Okay. Very strange. We've got internet with a tick because I'm connected. The router showing 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz on, and then clients which will show what's connected. So if I click onto clients, there's just one machine which is connected, which is the machine I'm recording on, and it's on wired. I presume if I click on this, I can edit the machine's name. And I'm going to click onto internet and see what that comes up with. That's just the status. And you can click on router, and that also doesn't really tell you much. It gives you a LAN IP address and its own LAN MAC address. You can go to internet, and that's just setting what we've just set in the wizard. So if we go to PPPoE, that's where you set the username and password. Static IP address if your ISP required that is what that screen looks like. So you could use it as an L2TP router if you have a VPN service which gives you L2TP. You could have your normal ISP router, so for example your Virgin Media router, your BT router, or whatever ISP you're on. You could then plug this router into your ISP's router and then set this to L2TP to your VPN provider, and all the traffic that comes in on the Wi-Fi to this TP-Link or on its network connection would go into this router, get L2TP'd all the way over to your VPN provider, where it would then go onto the internet. You can do the same for PPTP, which is a different type of VPN, but that's not so supported these days. So use L2TP wherever possible. Clicking over onto wireless. So I'm not sure why Smart Connect, which appears to give it the same name for 2.4 and 5 gigahertz, I'm not really sure why that wasn't on the wizard, because I would have ticked that and it would have saved me having to fill in two different boxes. So generally, unless there's a bug in their software, I would say you'd always want to enable Smart Connect, because it also looks like it has what's called band steering, where devices that will perform better on 5 gigahertz will get almost forcefully pushed over to the 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi. You can enable a guest Wi-Fi, which should restrict what they're allowed to connect to. So if you've got all of your printers and your server and other things on your normal network and you enable a guest network, the guests should be able to get to the internet, but they shouldn't be able to get to your printer and to your server and to other things internal to your own normal network. Going over to advanced, or in fact we have an upgrade. Let's click on upgrade. So I presume it's detected a firmware update, which it has. So you can also do you can download it from their website and do an update, but I will do the one from TP-Link's website. So I am currently on version 1.5.8, and from their website there is actually version 1.11.30. Let's see how detailed their notes are. Okay, some good improvements. Hardware acceleration for VPNs. CWMP is TR69, so remote management function. Okay, so many router manufacturers cannot create software. I see a lot of XyXLs, and their Wi-Fi is awful. It's not the hardware, probably. It's just the firmware that is written really badly. And it appears that this TP-Link also has a bug in their Wi-Fi, the 2.4 gigahertz. So I guess this firmware is very useful to apply because it might fix issues. Really bizarre ones where it changes the Wi-Fi name under certain circumstances. Okay, I really wish router manufacturers made better software these days. So I'll click on upgrade. You may as well see the process because I've got the ability to do it here, and we'll see how it goes. I will also ping the router so we can see just how quickly it comes back. So upgrade and go over to the ping, that will fetch it over the internet from TP-Link server and apply it to the router, and then the router will reboot. There we go, the router has rebooted and come back up with its logon page. The update option has disappeared in the top right. We've also gained a mesh devices box on the front screen. So I don't have any other OneMesh devices, but it would be interesting if I had a second one of these around, whether you could use them in a mesh layout. Interesting. It supports WPA3 for its wireless, and also this update seems to have broken its ability to know what security is enabled on the Wi-Fi. It's going to check whether actually on the Wi-Fi it's got password enabled, or whether that's disabled all the passwords. No, it still does have a password. So the web admin interface has gone a little bit wrong with the update, and it can't tell you what security is set, although security is still there. Going back to advanced then. We've got operation mode, we've got router mode, and you can also set it to be an access point only. So if you had a long network cable to another place in your house and you wanted Wi-Fi transmitted from there, you could set it to access point only mode, which would be a good option there as well. Not a big fan of how huge this top bar is, because it's leaving me only only half the screen to view the rest of the page. Anyway, we've got under network and then status, the WAN status and the LAN status. Internet looks pretty much like what we've already been through on the other page, on the simpler page. Although you can set the MTU of the WAN port when you're using PPPoE. And let's have a quick look at the L2TP settings. Username, password, VPN server, MTU, and whether it stays connected all of the time or whether you have to go into the admin interface and tell it to connect. Under LAN, this is where you change the IP address range of your own network if you needed it to be, for example, on 10.50.50.1 or something. That's where you'd set the IP range for your own network. IPTV and VLAN will be as if your internet provider supports it. I don't really know of any that do and also give out the information you'd need to make it work, but you could enable a particular VLAN to go through to a particular network port probably, or to just onto your network. And that would give you multicast IPTV and other features. DHCP server is where you change what IP addresses it gives out to devices on your own network, and also where you'd reserve IPs. So if you always wanted a printer to get given the same IP address, but still leave the printer into DHCP mode. That's where you'd add MAC address of the printer and then give the IP address that you always want the printer to have. Dynamic DNS supports TP-Link, no IP, which is free, and dyndns, which is not free. Routing looks like you can set static routes. So if you had multiple routers in your network and you needed to redirect traffic to another router, you could add it into this section here. TP-Link ID, which is to do with binding it to an online account, which I'm not going to do. I really dislike the idea, but apparently it lets you then control the router using an app, which isn't particularly useful for my use. The advanced wireless settings, again, doesn't know that encryption is set, but it is. That got lost during the firmware update. If I factory reset this, I presume then when I go through the setup process, it will sort itself out, but just for this video, it's not really worth doing that. So you can change the transmit power, set the channel width. Generally, the higher channel width you set, the better performance you should get on good devices. If you're in a block of flats where there are a lot of people nearby, setting a higher channel width might actually give you worse performance, or it's certainly not as neighbourly because you're using up more of the radio space, so your neighbours will then see worse performance. You can set the wireless channel, and the same for the 5 GHz Wi-Fi. Back onto the guest networks settings, which is just the same as what we saw on the basic settings page up here. Wireless schedule, so you can make sure it switches off overnight if you wanted. Might be especially useful if this is being used in a shop and you didn't want people standing outside when the shop was closed using the Wi-Fi. WPS is the button at the back of the router, which you can press, and then you can go over to a printer and press a button on the printer and it will connect. You can switch that off if you wanted there. Additional settings to do with wireless, lots of stuff that generally, unless you really know what you're doing, you should leave default. WDS is to do with wireless distribution system, so if you've got a WDS enabled access point or wireless repeater, you probably want to turn on WDS bridging in this section here, and your wireless repeater will probably work better, and things like AirPrint will probably work better over the Wi-Fi. So OneMesh looks like it's for multiple wireless points, but I don't have another OneMesh supported device here, so I can't test that section. It also looks like you'd need to set that up using an app, which is also much more difficult for me to film. Onto the NAT settings and port forwarding. So if you're wanting to run a server, like a Minecraft server, you would fill in the details here. It's running on my laptop, which I'm just going to guess is 0.65. It won't be that, but there we go. I have no idea what port Minecraft runs on, so I'll just do 85555. And I don't know whether it's TCP or UDP, so I'll just do the catch all of it being on all. And that's pretty easy for adding in port forwards. Port triggering is fairly niche. I don't think I've ever seen it used out in the wild, but that's what the port trigger screen looks like. UPnP, or Universal Plug and Play, is on by default. This is a feature which allows software or devices, so for example game consoles within your LAN, to use UPnP to control the router to add or remove port forwards automatically. So if you're security inclined, you probably want to turn off UPnP because then you're fully in control of what ports get opened back into your network. If you literally just want torrents and game consoles to work as well as possible, then you probably want to leave UPnP switched on. DMZ is forwarding every single port through to a device. It's often recommended incorrectly when people have NAT issues for their game consoles. It's a sledgehammer to crack a nut, so it's basically like a ridiculous way of fixing a small problem. Ideally, you should work out what ports you need to forward and fix it that way, rather than just use DMZ, which just sends everything through to that one device. But if you did want to port forward everything, that's the screen you'd do. You'd use DMZ to do it. Parental controls. Let's see how well this works. Let's try blocking the BBC, which is in the UK, for this computer. And I want to block it. Oh, interesting, a daily time limit. I'm not really sure how that will work, but I see yes. So we'll ignore time limits. We'll just block it all of the time, maybe. Let's see whether that works. And it appears that it does. So if I go over here and if I remove that BBC block, I then expect it will load over here. Yep, there we go. So that's how you would block websites and potentially, I guess, apps. If you knew that the domain names they connected to, you could block it in this screen. QoS, which is quality of service, can't be enabled when NAT boost is enabled, which will be hardware NAT acceleration. If you have a fast internet connection, you'd want to leave NAT boost on because you'll get the best performance by having that option switched on. But if you do want to do, what was I doing down here? Whatever that feature was, QoS, then the processor will have to process each packet and do the scheduling. Generally on higher connections, you probably don't need QoS. So I'm going to turn this off. Go to NAT forwarding and go to QoS. Whoops. And you can enable it for certain speeds. So if I do without QoS, I get the full gigabit even without the NAT hardware acceleration switched on, or NAT boost switched on. But I can now limit, for example, the upload to, let's try 400 megabits per second. And let's see, so the download should still be nearing a gigabit at 900 megabits, and we'll see, hopefully, the upload will be limited to around 400 megabits per second. Apparently it doesn't work very well. So that definitely didn't work. Let's try it on the download and see whether it's just a problem with one of the directions. Nope, well, I'd say that feature doesn't appear to work. How very strange. Let's set it ridiculously low, for example 1 megabit per second. Nope, okay, well I'd say that's potentially a bug in their firmware, or not that there's much that I can change on this screen. maybe I'm doing it wrong, but I mean, it's counting my data usage here. That's gone up by an extra 3 GB. And I've definitely got QoS enabled, so I guess there's a fault with that feature there. But generally, that should limit your speeds. So, for example, if you find that somebody uploading gives you high pings, you can set your upload bandwidth slightly lower than your maximum internet speed, and it should prevent that from being an issue, and your pings should stay better. You've got firewall settings. I like turning on pings from the WAN because it means that you can ping your connection when you're outside of the house and see how well it's performing. Access controls, which will be MAC address limiting. It's very easy to spoof MAC addresses on networks and on Wi-Fi, so I would not recommend using access control as a way of controlling devices on your network. If somebody's connecting who you don't want connected, you're better off changing the Wi-Fi password to something that they don't know, rather than using the MAC address blocking. IP address MAC binding seems like a fairly advanced feature. It will stop, as it says there, ARP spoofing attacks. That's a really unusual thing to be going on in a network where you're using one of these low-end routers, so I'm not even going to bother going through that. ALGs are application layer gateways. They quite often screw up stuff, so if you're finding that your PPTP or L2TP VPN on your computer is not working, you probably want to turn off these ALGs. And the same for FTP if you're having problems with that. You have IPv6 settings. Supports 6-to-4 tunnels, which is interesting, so probably Tunnel Broker from HE.net or Hurricane Electric. And onto system, which is probably where we did the firmware update. Yeah, so you've got firmware update. I'm now on the 1.11 firmware. Can back up the settings and upload the settings if you needed to copy it or to another router, or if you needed to factory reset it and restore the settings back onto it. Administration is where you can change your password and also set whether it's only allowed to be accessed. This admin interface is only allowed to be accessed from some devices. Turn on remote access into the router from the internet if you wanted to get into it remotely without using the app. System log, which actually seems to log quite a bit. CWMP, which is TR69, which is a remote control method for routers. So if your ISP, you generally as a user wouldn't ever enable this, but if you are an ISP and you wanted to control this router remotely, you'd probably turn on CWMP, point it at your TR69 server or your Genie ACS server, and off you go. Diagnostics, you can probably do pings and trace routes. Yep. Time and language. Remotely reboot the router. It also has a scheduled reboot, which is again not great. You shouldn't need to schedule reboot a router because they should make their software to be reliable enough that you don't need to reboot it regularly. You can turn the LEDs off on the router. It's going to do that, and then yep, all the LEDs on the front have gone off. And you can schedule it to switch the LEDs on and off at certain times. So if you have it in a bedroom or something and you wanted the lights to go off. And there we go. That's all of the admin pages on this TP-Link Archer C64 router. Hopefully this video has been helpful to you. If it has, it would be really helpful to me if you wouldn't mind subscribing to my YouTube channel. You don't need to have the video notifications switched on, but the subscriber numbers really do help. Thank you very much.